Hello everyone. Today I want to talk about a very interesting topic. It is a pretty popular topic in gun stores. When I worked as a firearm salesman, it was probably one of the things that came up more often than not, and that is optics for your guns. So what we're going to do today is actually compare low power variable optics with red dots. Now, I want to start off by saying I haven't tried every red dot on the market. I've definitely used the main two, which is like the EOTech and the Aimpoint. And I definitely haven't used every low power variable optic on the market either. I definitely got a lot of experience with the Vortex Razor. I've got some experience with some Trijicon stuff, the EOTech Voodoo, and a couple others that I've looked through but haven't shot. But I feel like I've got a good grasp to compare the capabilities of those two systems to give you guys an idea of what you may or may not want for your particular applications. So let's go ahead and get started. So the first optic I want to go over is the red dot. This is the one I've been using for a very long time. This is an Aimpoint H1. I would say probably one of the main optics out there is the T2 now. This is the predecessor to that, and it's the non-night vision compatible version of it. It's still a very, very solid optic, but let's go ahead and go over why something like this might be advantageous and why I actually recommend this for most people as like a more general purpose optic when it comes to personal defense. So with the red dot, one of the number one benefits I think you're getting out of it is extremely simple. So compared to something like iron sights, which this was kind of the next step up from iron sights, it's going to allow you one focal plane. And what that means is I don't have to line up a rear sight, a front sight, and then a target and focus on all three of those things. I can keep both eyes open, stare at my target, bring my gun up to my eyes, and basically superimpose that red dot over my threat or my target, whatever I'm aiming at. Simply put the dot where you want the bullet to go for the most part, give or take, and engage your target. Super easy, super simple, very easy to teach new people this type of an optic, or if somebody hasn't trained very much with guns but understands the concept behind this, it's pretty easy for them to get behind this optic and put in some work with a gun like this. So yeah, I think that's probably one of the biggest benefits to something like this is it's just very, very simple, very straightforward. Now, another benefit to it is it's also going to be very compact and lightweight for the most part. Most of them, in comparison to scopes, are going to be smaller and lighter than them. They're also going to be pretty durable, specifically referring to things like the EOTechs and the Aimpoints that I've used before. These optics are very rugged and very proven. If you want the most rugged optic out there, I definitely recommend the Aimpoint. I think it does have a little bit more durability than something like the EOTech. That said, the EOTech, in my experience, I felt performed better overall in a variety of circumstances, including night vision stuff, and was, I just thought, more forgiving and a better optic as far as me using it. However, because it has a larger window, it is a little bit more prone to potential damage, and the battery life isn't quite as good with that one. Which brings me to one of the cons with running a red dot on your gun, and that is they are going to be battery dependent. If you are concerned about your optic dying, like if you're having a gun set up for like doomsday prepping type stuff and you want a red dot but you want it to just last forever, something like an Aimpoint with extra batteries on board, whether you shove them in the grip or you get the nitro armament cap, something like that, is going to suit you a little bit better than something like an EOTech. But if you're somebody who's looking for something that's duty use, and especially if you're using night vision, I would consider the EOTech as a top performer in that category. So either one, just know your equipment and know what you need to do to maintain it. So there's not a whole lot of craziness going on with a red dot. One of the other downsides that I do want to mention in comparison to a low power variable, which is the main difference, is you're not going to get the magnification that a low power variable is going to offer. You could add a magnifier on this, and I'll talk about that in just a second, but for the most part, actually, you're just going to have your regular vision. That's what it is. It's just your normal vision whenever you look at any targets. Now, the question is, can you still engage targets at distance using a red dot? Absolutely, 100% you can. In fact, I've taken that gun that we were just looking at, that 11.5-inch BCM with an EOTech, no magnifier, out to about 630 yards, and I was getting consistent hits on a C-zone silhouette, and I was shooting off a backpack. I was prone shooting off a backpack. Can you do it? Yes. However, there's a lot of problems with a real-world application shooting at that distance. If that kind of distance is realistic for you, which if you're a SWAT guy, if you're a cop, if you're a civilian, I don't think it really is realistic. I don't think it's likely you're going to be getting it in a shooting at 600 yards. I don't think there's been a single domestic shooting that has been that long range. I think the longest shot ever is still well under 200 yards. So I don't think it's realistic to do that, and you do run into several problems. The first being, can you articulate that your target that's that far away is an active threat to your life? Unless they're shooting at you and that fire is effective and you can guarantee that they're actually shooting at you and it's that person you're looking at down there, it's going to be very hard to articulate that. And the next thing is, can you actually identify that person down there? That doesn't mean you have to know exactly who they are, but can you identify who is the threat? So if there are multiple people downrange, if this is in a public setting and you have people in your foreground and in your background, can you actually take a safe shot back at that person? That's a kind of a difficult situation to answer there. So especially with a red dot, if you have your regular vision and you end up with some fringe scenarios we've seen out there, like the Vegas shooting in 2016 or 2017. Could somebody in that crowd have returned fire and effectively engaged and guaranteed that they were going to hit the shooter and not miss and hit a different window and, you know, kill an innocent person by accident? That's difficult, especially with those lighting conditions. Really, they're not getting that. Not getting a good opportunity to take that shot back at that person. So that being said, in an actual situation where we have seen shootings at these ranges, that's been overseas. That's been like military guys. I would expect that it's probably normal for those targets to be moving, to be wearing some level of camouflage, because my target was standing, it was positioned in the open and painted so that it was in contrast with the environment. So I would imagine they'd probably be moving or taking cover, returning fire, and probably camouflage to some degree. Now, if that's the case and you're in that situation, red dot's going to be probably a little short for what you need there, especially getting a precision shot at that distance. Getting a hit on a man-sized target, sure. If there's no background issues and you're getting shot at, sure, you can return fire with something like this. Is it going to be precise and effective and consistent, especially compared to something like a scope? Probably not. So what I mentioned before about magnifiers, you can increase the capability of your red dot by adding a magnifier onto it. Now, I don't have a magnifier to show you today, but I have used them a lot in the past. And I will tell you that while it does help with target ID and getting a little bit more of a precise shot at any given distance, there are some downsides. And that is the eye box is very small. The field of view usually is typically pretty small. And then on top of that, the eye relief is pretty short. So for me, when I mount one of these guns, I've got either the brace or the stock pretty far back. I like to have a good amount of leverage. As you can see, I don't have this thing shrunken all the way up where my nose is to charging handle like the Magpul days when they said that you want your nose to your charging handle. I like to keep it extended quite a bit. And the reason is that gives me more stability and it actually perceivably reduces the recoil. But what I think is it gives me more leverage to control the recoil. But regardless, my head, as you can see, is all the way back here. If I threw a magnifier on it, the rear of the glass on a longer magnifier might be even with my charging handle. In order to get a good picture, I would still have to sink my head all the way up here in order to look through it, and I don't like that idea of having to get in this position where I'm pushing my head all the way forward to look through it. I like having a decent amount of eye relief. So that, for me, was one of the most annoying things about using a magnifier, is how short the eye relief was. However, if you shoot the gun a little bit differently than me, or you have a different setup where that's not a problem and the eye relief isn't a problem for you, then go for it, or give it a try. If you don't have any experience with them, you may like them. So the magnifier definitely has some advantages, but it's definitely got some disadvantages too. And unfortunately, that's why most of the time you're not going to see me running a magnifier on my red dotted guns. So next, let's go ahead and talk about the low power variable scopes. So this, you guys have seen this one before on my recce video, but this is my Razor 1-6. I've been running Razors for a while. This is actually my second one. I had the original Razor, and then I got the Echo model because I wanted to save a little bit of weight. I've been running the JM1 BDC reticle the entire time I've run these, and I switched my mount from the Geisley to the ScalarWorks just because I wanted to save as much weight as possible. So let's go over why something like this is a great option. First and foremost, a low power variable scope is going to give you, in my mind, more capability than a red dot, with the exception of one category that we mentioned earlier, which is night vision shooting. So if you're running night vision goggles and you're trying to aim passively through your optic, meaning you're not actively sending out any infrared signature like an illuminator or a laser or anything like that, but I have my goggles on, and then I get my goggles and I put them behind the optic and look through it and use my optic as my aiming solution, something like the aim point, or especially the EOTech, is going to perform much better than something like this. Due to the levels of glass this has to go through, and also your prescription being different, going through you adjust the diopter on your night vision when you're using that, and then you now have to adjust this if your eyes aren't that great, like mine aren't. You actually have to adjust your diopter to get a clear image through the scope, and then when you do get a clear image, you have eye relief and eye shadowing issues still, and then the illumination coming through the scope is very dim compared to how it is normally through your goggles. So you can aim passively through a low power variable scope. I've done it before, but it is not very good compared to a red dot. So that is something to note with the scope. That said, in every other way, I think you're gaining capability with the scope, even in a CQB setting, and let me explain why. A second ago I mentioned my eyes aren't that great. I've got astigmatism in both eyes, and I'm also nearsighted now that I'm getting a little older and my eyes are getting worse. So if you see, my diopter on my scope is pretty far back here. A lot of people have it like all the way up. Mine's pretty far back, and that's because my eyes aren't that great. So in a CQB setting, let's say I'm taking a shot at, 15 yards, but this individual is camouflaged in some trees or something like that. When I bring this up versus when I bring up a red dot. When I bring up a red dot, it's my normal vision, and I have an astigmatism, so it blows out that dot. So that 2 MOA dot looks like a 6 MOA dot to me, and it looks oblong or oddly shaped. When I bring up something like this, because it is set to my eyes, I actually see better. I see clearer, sharper through the scope at 1x. And when you're looking at a distance that is not like 3 yards away, where you're going to get a little bit of fisheye effect with something like a scope, I'm looking at about, 20 yards here. I actually get a very flat, very clean image, and it's very, very sharp. So it helps me pick out fine details even at 1x, and then I have a very sharp reticle still. So because it's not a red dot, I don't have the same problems that I do as far as my astigmatism goes with a low power variable scope. So it actually does aid me in even CQB type stuff. The big benefit obviously to this is the versatility, being able to crank up to 6x. Even in a CQB type setting, that can be very beneficial. So something like this scope, obviously is going to help you at those greater distance shots get more precise. It's got a BDC in it that actually lines up to this particular gun with the barrel length and the ammunition, and where I'm shooting at actually lines up so it matches, so I can get quick range estimation on a man-sized target and a quick hold on that target. So I'm going to be more consistent and I'm going to be on target faster with this versus my red dot, where I kind of have to guess where to hold and take the shot from there. This one I actually have subtensions, and then depending on your reticle and things like that, you can actually get very detailed with your subtensions and your range estimation. But aside from that, this can help even in a CQB setting, and we've actually seen this relatively recently with a Phoenix PD officer who took a shot. We've actually seen this pretty recently with a Phoenix PD officer who took a hostage shot at about 30 yards. Got out of his car, cranked this thing up to 6 power, got stable, and was able to take a precise shot like that. Now, a 30-yard shot on a hostage taker when they're armed and they have a child and you've got a lot of stuff going on around you can be a bit stressful, especially in a real-world situation. Can you take that shot with a red-dotted pistol? Of course you can. It is going to demand a pretty high level of skill, but you could. Can you take that shot with a red-dotted rifle? Yeah, there's a lot of people out there who could probably take that shot with a red-dotted rifle. Would most people probably prefer to get stable with a scoped rifle at 6x and be able to get a very precise shot at that distance? I would say yes. I would say most people, especially most cops, would probably prefer to run something like a scope in that given situation. One of the things in a real shooting we have to ask ourselves, especially domestically, is can we guarantee hits? If I'm thinking it's not very likely I can hit this guy right now, I'm probably not going to be taking that shot because I am accountable for every round that comes out of the gun. So there's a huge amount of liability, there's a huge amount of risk, and I'm not talking about necessarily a legal liability. There is that too, but I'm talking more of a moral liability. Yeah, are you going to be able to live with yourself if you miss your intended target and shoot an innocent person, or worse, shoot the hostage, which we've seen in some police shooting videos, unfortunately, where cops get a little bit too excited during a shooting and end up killing the hostage instead of the hostage taker, or they kill both. So that's where something like this can be beneficial, is even in a closer range shot, if it is a low percentage shot, a very high risk shot, and you need to be very, very precise about your placement, you can be much more exact and much more confident with something like a scope versus something like the red dot, especially for people like me who have problems with your eyes. Another big benefit to running a low power variable optic is the etched reticle. So I do have a very bright red dot in this that I can use, but I find myself never using that. And I find that people, even though I like having a very bright red dot in a scope, I do find that it is a little overrated, just because in the daytime, if you have a good reticle, you're going to be able to see, especially second focal plane like this, you're going to be able to see that reticle in a lot of different environments. And I find that 90% of the time, I'm just using the regular etched reticle, so I'm not dependent on any batteries. This is going to last forever as long as the scope doesn't get catastrophically damaged. The other benefit to having a good etched reticle in here is at nighttime, when I'm using my flashlight, yeah, the reticle, I don't have the illumination on, but once I turn that flashlight on, it brightens up everything so much and adds so much contrast that the reticle actually stands out. So even at nighttime, I find myself not using that red dot still. It's only in very specific lighting conditions that I actually turn on that dot. And to be honest, I haven't really come across those as of yet. So I'm sure they're out there. I'm sure it's necessary in some situations, but with this particular scope, being that it's a second focal plane and it's got a good reticle in it, I don't find myself needing that. If I'm running something like a first focal plane reticle, which is a reticle that changes size based on your magnification, so it remains the same size in relation to the target, but as you magnify your scope and go up in magnification, the target seems to enlarge. You're increasing the image of the target there. You're also going to see the reticle enlarge. Because you don't want too thick of a reticle when you're at max magnification, when you crank it down all the way, a lot of times you end up with too thin of a reticle where it ends up being almost translucent, small, and hard to pick up at 1x. On those scopes, I would say a good illumination is more important if you are using that scope for your 1x and not supplementing it like what I have with the red dot. I've actually got a scope that does excellent at 1x, and I've got a supplemental red dot on it so that if I am at 6x, I can turn over and have my red dot right there. So those are the main benefits to something like a scope like this. So with all that out of the way, let's go ahead and talk about a few of the downsides to running a scope over something like a red dot. The first being, in my mind, the cost. The cost of this is going to be more than something like your aim point or especially your EOTech. You're going to be spending 2-3 times as much between the scope and the mount and a throw lever for it, if you need a throw lever for it. So that is something to consider with these. Also, size and weight. It is comparable, some of the lighter versions of scopes out there, to running a red dot magnifier and their mounts in some ways, but generally speaking, running something like an aim point with a mount is going to be much lighter than something like running a scope. Even the lightest scopes out there that are like 16 ounces and a very light mount. So you'll probably be somewhere around 21 ounces with the lightest scope setup versus probably somewhere around 6 ounces with the lightest setup for red dots. And that's just my guess. I don't know the exact numbers off the top of my head, but just to give you an idea. The last thing that is a training thing with scopes is they will demand a little bit higher level of proficiency. Now, you can be just as fast with a scope as you can with a red dot, even in CQB distances, but it will demand that when you mount the gun, that your head is in the right spot. If my head is too far to the left, to the right, up, or down, I'm going to get what's called scope shadowing, which basically kind of closes the image of the scope off to me just because of the way the glass works, so I can't actually see anything through the scope. So I have a precise spot my head needs to be. The other thing is eye relief. Eye relief is specific on a magnified optic, whereas there's unlimited eye relief on a red dot. And what that means is I can't be too far away from the scope or too close to the scope. What happens is I should be seeing this window here, and that window starts to shrink down if I'm too far away or too close. So I have kind of a precise point my head needs to be going through this. It is going to be more expensive, it is going to be heavier, it is going to take up a little bit more room on your gun, but it is going to give you some more capability in many ways over a red dot. So I hope all of this information helps you guys determine exactly what you want. I am a huge fan of low power variable optics. I'm a huge fan of red dots, and I think that either way, you're going to be set up with a pretty good optic if you choose something like the aim point or choose something like the Vortex Razor. It's really up to you guys what you want to do. If you want that extra capability that, like I mentioned earlier, most times in a civilian setting is not needed, but you just want the peace of mind, you want the etched reticle, you have bad eyesight and you want better performance with the optic, then go for something like this. Even for a CQB gun, something like this would still be well suited on it. But if you are running a lot of night vision stuff, and if mostly what you're doing is CQB stuff, then I would say a red dot is probably more than sufficient for you, and actually would be better in some situations if you're running that night vision passively and stuff like that. So all things to consider. If there's any comments or questions on any of this stuff, please let me know down below. I love talking about this stuff. It's one of my favorite topics out there, and there's a lot of stuff I didn't mention in this video just because I kind of wanted to stick to kind of the basics of all of these particular optics. So with that being said, guys, stay safe out there, and God bless.